Welcome to the Woodridge Baptist Church podcast. For more information about what's happening in the life of our church, visit our website at www.woodridge.org. Enjoy the podcast.
That said, let's jump into the Word. Today we're going to be looking at divorce and marriage and other things. Really, the main thing that we're going to be looking at today is marriage, because that's the main thing that Jesus actually looks at in this passage. But if there was something that kind of on the front end of it that I could say, I just want you to lock in to your mind and into your attention on what Jesus wants to talk about regarding marriage, it would be this: true discipleship involves submitting to God's plan for marriage. That if you are a disciple of Jesus, if you are a follower of Jesus, that means that you submit to what he teaches you to do in your marriage. That is actually a part of your being a disciple of Jesus. So with that set up front, I just want to jump into the text. Let's see what the Lord wants to show us today. Here's the way it begins in Mark chapter 10, verse 1. So that's Jesus, he set out from there and he went to the region of Judea across the Jordan. Now, just to fill you in on what this actually means, he's probably on the east side of the Jordan River. He's in Gentile country, in other words. And so Jesus has been moving in and out. He goes into an area that's primarily Jewish. He goes over into an area that is primarily Gentile. He goes back into areas that are primarily Jewish. This area that he's in right here is also the place where John the Baptist did most of his ministry. And that's important because if you remember what happened to John the Baptist had this moment where he was asked about marriage. And it ended up getting his head chopped off because of his answer. And so Jesus comes back into this territory. You have a group of people called the Pharisees that are coming up to him. They're not acting in good faith, by the way. They want to get him a gotcha question so that people would start to associate Jesus with John the Baptist with the hopes that the same thing that happened to John the Baptist would happen to him. This is what's going on in this passage. Verse 2 says they came to test him. So you know they're not coming in good faith, right? There are a couple of things that I want you to note in advance. And this is the first. Jesus is going to give an answer to some questions that they ask that does not include everything about marriage and divorce. Like, when is divorce permissible? He doesn't actually answer a lot of that. And so if you're looking for him just to say, well, here's some bullet points for you, you're not going to find that today. Here's a second thing that I want you to just note up front. Jewish law permitted divorce. It permitted it. The question was, on what grounds is it permitted? If you were to look over in Matthew chapter 19, which is the parallel passage to Mark chapter 10, Matthew adds a couple of things in there that Mark didn't mention. So the question was, can a man divorce his wife? In Matthew 19:3, it says, for any cause. And then you see in Matthew chapter 19, verse 9, it's what's often called the exception clause, which is this: you find sexual immorality. So if you find sexual immorality, then divorce is permissible. It's not obligatory. You don't have to. It says you can. Well, what about other examples? And that's what they're trying to get Jesus with. All right, so hold on to that. So let's pick up where we left off. So the crowds converged on him again, and as it was his custom, he taught them again. And some Pharisees came to test him, asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And he replied to them, well, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses permitted us to write divorce papers and send her away. Well, that sounds nice and clean, doesn't it? I mean, where they're quoting this from is Deuteronomy 24:1, and this is what it says. If a man marries a woman, but she becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, he may write her a certificate of divorce, hand it to her, and send her away from his house. Now, there's a couple of words in there. If she becomes displeasing to him, if he finds something indecent about her. I don't know. Those are words that just seem to be begging for a definition. What do you think? Is that fair? What is indecency? Well, back then, there were two main schools of thought in Jewish tradition. One was called the school of Shammai, and the other was called the school of Hillel. If you were to talk to anybody from the school of Shammai, what they believed that about divorce was, if you find that there's adultery, then divorce is permissible. And you go, well, what about outside of that? And they're like, yep, the list isn't very big. It's actually very small. very small. The school of Hillel, on the other hand, they were much more permissive in what they allowed when they allowed for divorce. I just want to give you a couple of examples. Here you go. Here's the first. If she burns his food, then divorce is permissible. You know, it got me. All right. I ain't done. If he finds another woman more attractive than his wife, he could divorce her if she walked in public with her head uncovered. He could divorce her if she talked with men in the streets. He could divorce her if she spoke disparagingly of her mother-in-law. Do y'all want more or are we good? I mean, you sit there and you go, we're just making crud up anymore, right? I find you displeasing. And so here's your writ of divorce and off you go. Now, with the Pharisees, you got to remember, they're the ones that are coming up and asking Jesus the question, right? And I know you're wondering, well, which school of thought did they align themselves with? And the answer is the school of Hillel. They liked for the parameters of divorce to be really, really broad, largely because, did you notice this really does benefit who? The guy. Did you notice that? And so look at verse 5. It says, but Jesus told them, yeah, well, he, meaning Moses, he wrote this command for you because of the hardness of your hearts. Zing! You're a joke. I mean, you come up and you try to find this list of ways that you can get out of something that you committed yourself to. Did it ever cross your mind that that's a pretty sorry place to start? So he just kind of gut punches them back. Yeah, God allows divorce because your heart is hard. In Malachi 2:16, it says that God hates divorce, and he does. But do you know why that's the case? It's not so much because of the certificate or what Jesus talks about, a writ of divorce, so much as it was all of the actions that people took that led to the divorce. When you stand before God in a marriage and on a wedding day, you're making covenant obligations to the person that you're marrying and to God as your witness. Now, I'm going to be the first person to tell you that on December 15th of 2001, when Wendy and I got married, the day of our wedding, when the back doors of that thing popped open, and then there was Wendy and her dad, I thought, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. And it wasn't a moment where I thought, I think I'm choosing poorly today. I don't know what I'm doing. That wasn't it. I wasn't thinking that at all. It's, I don't know what I'm doing. She's walking down this aisle, and there's just a certain sort of man that I'm supposed to be. And it doesn't matter what circumstances we face. This is a big deal. And I was just really, the moment just came upside my head. How about you? When you look at this passage, the certificate of divorce was for the benefit of the innocent person in the marriage. There were protections that were meant to be in place for them, and especially the woman. I mean, imagine that a woman back in the ancient Near East is abandoned. Her ability to provide for herself was very, 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 very low. There needed to be protections and provisions for her so that men didn't just abuse an opportunity. And Jesus was speaking against that. And so they come wanting to talk about divorce, but Jesus just turns the conversation. He goes, how about we talk about marriage? I love what a friend of mine says. He said this. He goes, if you're going to become a pilot, you don't want to just practice crash landings. You want to learn how to fly. And I'm here to tell you that what Jesus is going to talk about is how you can fly in your marriage. And so he gives us several points to remember. And this is the first of them. And you find it in Mark chapter 10, verse 6. It says, from the beginning of creation. And right there, you need to stop because we're reminded of this truth. Marriage was God's creation, not ours. It was God's creation, not ours. It is not a matter of a definition of something that we ascribe to it. It was given to us by God as a good gift to us. It's his plan. It's not mine. The second thing is marriage is between one man and one woman. As Jesus is quoting here in Mark chapter 10, going all the way back to Genesis, God made them male and female. This means that he set the boundaries for personal identity. This was a creation statement. It was not a cultural statement. This is how he made it. This is how it flourishes. Even if you look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, the way that it describes the woman, when the woman is presented to the man, God made her a suitable helper for him. Be careful what you do with that. Because the words suitable helper are used more of God than it is of anybody else in the Bible. This wasn't an opportunity to say, hey, you're here to help me. I'm here to use you. It is not meant for that at all. It's primarily used of God as somebody that comes alongside us. The way that Genesis describes her is that Adam needed a different sort of human. You might remember that before all of this went down, the other animals of creation were presented to Adam, and he saw that there was no suitable helper. And then God fashions the woman, and he presents her to him. And she is called Ezer Kenegdo. Did y'all write that down? Kenegdo, the word means suitable. It's from the Hebrew word that literally, if you were to kind of translate it into the English, this is what it would mean. It's a little wonky, but it's basically what it means. She's like opposite him. She's like opposite him. And you go, well, in what way is she like him? And the answer is, they're both human beings. You had already seen the lions and tigers and bears, oh my, none of them worked. She's like him in the fact that she is human being. Well, in what way is she opposite him? Jokingly, I go, every way. But really what Scripture had in mind was literally, biologically, anatomically, she's opposite of him. And the possible prospects of this union is something that he said when he brought them together. And he says, this is your marriage, be fruitful and multiply. That when this is the union between a man and a woman in a covenant bond before God, this was his design plan. That, as it goes on to say, this is a one flesh union. Think about it, verse 7. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, the two will become one flesh. They're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Some of the final words as a part of your vows, my guess, and many of your weddings, for those of you that are married here today, were those exact words. And that includes us, the ones saying them. I won't break this down. I'll honor this. I will be who I'm saying that I will be. It's that moment. The two become one. And what this reminds us of is that marriage involves giving up your independence. It's over. You relinquished it. A professor, I love what a professor of mine once said. He said, marriage is the one time where the math don't math. 1 + 1 = 1. 1 + 1 = 1. Two persons that are committed to the same goals and objectives that have committed their marriage to Jesus. Tim Keller, I love what he says. He says, this is to say, marriage is far more than an association or a partnership. It is that, by the way. It's more than a partnership or association for common goals. It creates a new unit, emotionally, spiritually, personally, and even physically. And he's right. What this means is that there is a change in who you are. The two become one. Flesh. And when you think of flesh, you typically think of your body, don't you? And that's true because there is something that is unique that God gave in a marriage, and that's called sexual intimacy. Be fruitful and multiply, right? That's part of it. But the Hebrew word means much more than that. It's not just physical. It means that there is unity in every area of your life. Physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. This was what I said years ago when I was talking with Wendy's mom and dad. You will never have to worry about her again. Never. I will take care of her physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. That is my job. That is my job. But it's also a mutual responsibility because two people make vows, and it's sacred. What God has joined together, don't separate it. Don't break it down. Remember what you said you would do and the person that you said that you would be. So there's the crowd, and then the disciples, they have this teaching moment with Jesus. They kind of break away from the crowd, and here's what happened in verse 10. It says, when they were in the house again, the disciples questioned him about the matter, and he said to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. Also, if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. David Instone Brewer wrote a dissertation on this, which means I know you're all going to run out and read it. But this is the big idea. David Instone Brewer looked and he said, where there were legitimate grounds of divorce, then remarriage was permitted. However, if the grounds for your divorce were not permitted, then you were never supposed to break the bond of your marriage, and you certainly weren't supposed to be marrying somebody else. And that's why he said you would commit adultery against her. You illegitimately stepped out of your covenant obligations to someone, and then you gave yourself to somebody else. That's adultery. So if divorce is permissible, remarriage is permissible. If it's not, it's not. And this is tough. I mean, a lot of what I try to help people with, as a pastor, or people that struggle with their marriage. And my first inclination is to come alongside and say, we want to fight for this. We want to fight for this if we can. But I'm reminded of something James Edwards said. He said, the intent of Jesus' teaching is not to shackle those who fail in marriage with debilitating guilt. The question is not whether God forgives those who fail in marriage. The answer to that question is assured in Mark 3:28. All the sins and blasphemies of men will be forgiven. He goes on to say this, though. There is, after all, no instance in Scripture of an individual seeking forgiveness and being denied it by God. Not one. The question in our day of impermanent commitments and casual divorce is whether we as Christians will hear the unique call of Christ to discipleship in marriage. In marriage, as in other areas to which the call of Christ applies, will we seek relief in what is permitted or commit ourselves to what is intended by God and commanded by Christ? Will we sunder the divine union of two become one flesh, or will we honor and nurture marriage as a gift and a creation of God? And we answer the question by what we do with our marriage. That's the answer, is what we actually do with it. So I want to give you some thoughts this morning. And I want to start with those that are out that are not married. I want to start with you. And I want to say this. When you're preparing for marriage, prepare for the long haul. When you're preparing for marriage, prepare for the long haul. What this means is that you're developing yourself into the husband or the wife that God wants you to be. You're not waking up on your wedding day and saying, okay, today is the day that virtue really matters. It matters now that you see the choices that you make as choices that are honoring and protecting the sanctity of marriage and who your future spouse might be if God intends for you to actually get married. And that means that even right now, you're thinking companionship. You're thinking there's sacrifice that's involved. There are some things that you wait for. But also remember this, for those of you that are not yet married, choose wisely. Choose wisely. Think of what Proverbs 18:22 says. He who finds a good wife finds a good thing. And all God's husbands said, there you go. By the way, I do think that the opposite is also true, right? It's not just he who finds a good wife, but she who finds a good husband. And all God's wives said, amen. See, y'all are weaker than the guys. And we judge you for it today. So there's that, but think about this, because it's true. It's true. But think about this. Solomon also said, a quarrelsome wife is like the constant dripping of a leaky roof. Proverbs 19:13. Choose wisely. By the way, I would guess it's also true. A quarrelsome husband is like the constant dripping of a leaky roof. It's true. Think about this. When Solomon was writing Proverbs, he was writing it to his son. And when you read Proverbs, you get to Proverbs 31, and there's this description of the Proverbs 31 woman. But really, and this is kind of the trick of the passage, is it was meant for his son to hear. If you see a woman like this, snatch her up. Snatch her up. And think of the way that she is described. I'm just going to give you a few things to think about. She fears the Lord. She is faithful. She is wise. She's diligent. She's generous. She's trustworthy. She brings good into the world. She's loving. She helps the needy. She's praiseworthy. She's kind. And those are only a few. And by the way, what is true of what Solomon wrote to his son, look for a woman like this. It would be true for a woman too to look for a husband just like that. It would be true. One of the questions that I ask my girls, or I want them to kind of keep in mind, especially because I have 4 and none of them are married, it's kind of a simple question. When you are dating somebody, do they make you closer to Jesus? Or are they asking you to compromise your faith and your values and your integrity? If they're asking them to compromise, I'm perfectly content for them to send them away. I say, I would rather them have a short-term hurt in their heart than long-term misery because they didn't choose wisely. I would rather have that. So choose wisely. Do they make you closer to Jesus? Or are they asking you to compromise? All right. For those of you that are married, here are a few thoughts for you this morning. Here's a few. And this is the first. Cultivate a healthy marriage. Cultivate it. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. You have to cultivate it. We're offering marriage classes on Wednesday nights. Jump in. Come on, sign up and jump in. Come on. But there's something else that really struck me as I was preparing this for this week. There was a survey that was done of people that are professing believers in Jesus, and the question was asked, how many of you pray together? And the answer was 11%. 11%. 11% of spouses that are followers of Jesus actually stop, pump the brakes, and pray for and with each other. You might hear something like this. The divorce rates among Christians, it's not really any different than the secular world, so it's not like your faith is really providing you that much of a boost. There's not really any difference among you. But I think it's actually a poorly asked question because studies have been done. And when the question takes a little bit of a different shape and you ask them, how many of you in your marriage, you worship together consistently? You pray together. You're with each other spiritually in this. The numbers change. And this goes even back to 1997 where they found this. 1 out of every 1,152 end in a divorce. The more that they studied it, for people that were active in their faith, that number dropped to around 1%. It was virtually non-existent. John Gottman is considered one of the great marriage gurus nowadays. And after decades of studying what brings or what makes for a successful marriage, I want to give you a few of his thoughts. Feel free to write these down. Here was the first. He said, happy couples make an effort to learn one thing that is happening in their spouse's life that day before saying goodbye in the morning. Let's just one thing. Because just take a few minutes to find out. It doesn't have to be an hour. Probably don't have an hour, right? But just take a little bit. The second thing, he talks about reunions. When you see each other at the end of the day, share a hug and a kiss that lasts 10 seconds. This is what I'm going to do with Wendy. I'm putting it on the clock. No, I'm just kidding. And start. That lasts 10 seconds because literally your body has a reaction to it in that time. And you bond. And then he said this, then have a stress-reducing conversation for about 20 minutes. Not, you're coming back in from a busy day, all the work, you walk into the door and it's like, sit down because I have 900 pounds of weight I'd like to dump on your shoulders right now. They've been dumped on all day. Can we take about 20 minutes just to go, hey, and to chat and to reconnect and to do it just a little bit every day? That's the reunion. Here was something else he talked about, appreciation and admiration. He said, journal it if you need to, but this is most important, express it often. Express it often. It primes your mind to see the positive traits of each other rather than just the negative, and especially when you're struggling in your marriage. I see that there's more going on here than just the things that we're struggling through. And I want you to know that. He said it's important. The next, he talks about affection. Embrace before falling asleep. Guys, free of charge. A woman releases endorphins after a hug that lasts 20 seconds. Literally, it just pacifies her body. So I'm going to get my phone out and the timer. I'm kidding. Date night, have them. Have them. Enjoy this. It's part of what God gave you each other for. Enjoy it. But every now and again, he says, you do have to have what's called the State of the Union address. You got to get together and talk about real things. Things that you disagree on. Decisions that have to be made. You do have to stop every week and just make sure that you're on the same page and you're not assuming things about each other. He said, this is what he found. Couples that actively do this rarely get divorced. That's cultivating your relationship. But we're reminded of an important truth, and this is second. Your marriage is precious. Fight for it. It's worth it. Yes, Jesus says that divorce is at times permitted, but divorce isn't the answer for things that you just need to work through together. It's not the answer for that. And it wasn't God's plan for that. Instead, develop your friendship, develop your relationship, and don't forget what got you to the altar to begin with. You were probably pursuing each other. Keep pursuing each other. And that means sometimes you just got to talk, right? I'll admit, a lot of times by the time I get home, I'm out of words. I spend a lot of my day with people, and that's good, and I'm happy to do that. I really am. A lot of times when I get home, I'm out of words. But that's the time the family's actually getting back together. We've been scattered, and all to good things, right? Not unusual that if you were to have a camera in the Evans house, and it was kind of perched in the corner, and you were to see us sitting around the table and we're eating together, all of my girls are talking, and I'm quietly eating. And it's also not unusual if, and I think Wendy would probably say yes, if she were to say something like this, "How was your day?" And I go something like this, "Yeah, it's fine." And she goes, "Was there anything you want to talk about?" And I go, "No, I'm good." It's not unusual for Wendy to say something like this. "This has been a great conversation. I'm glad that we had it." It's fair. Now, do I need some silence of it? Yeah, I do. But there's only so far that's going to go, people. Because at some point, I've got to jump in, and I've got to talk with her, and I've got to be present with her, and I've got to connect with her. And it doesn't happen by me just sitting there and being quiet. Sometimes you just got to. But there's something else that's really important in all of this, and it's that we have to learn to forgive each other. Mistakes will be made. They will. I've made them. Wendy's made them. For those of you that are married, you have too. Don't lie to me. You know it. C.S. Lewis said, everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. And then it's like, I hate it. Of course you do. Who likes being in that situation? And yet one of the ways that we model our discipleship in Jesus is that we forgive like he forgave us. I want you to think about this. Forgiveness is the beginning of putting things back together. It's the beginning. There's nowhere to go until you do. And after that, you can begin by reestablishing trust and connection and intimacy. It has to be there. This is what God wanted it to be. It's what he designed it for. Mutual blessing, mutual edification as a part of our discipleship and commitment to him and what he's given to us. It's a beautiful thing.
We hope you have enjoyed the podcast. For more information about our church, visit www.woodridge.org.